Hi, guys. Hi.
Hey guys.
Oh, who the hell are we? This is the Wrestling Fans Incite. I'm your host that seems like a ghost lately. I'm John Hoppy, along with my tag team partner, Brian the Hype Ballard. And it has been, since post WrestleMania, since we've done an episode.
It's been a while. I'm glad to see that you're back now from being cancel cultured. We won't get into all that. So welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry, everyone. It has been hell for the last 6 weeks. So, due to battling illness, losing a family pet, and trying to get my outside projects here at home done, on top of a few other things, the big positive is getting projects done. But Sarah and I actually were in a tournament back in May, and we actually took the doubles division. So, not to kind of go back on a gimmick, but I'm the doubles champions.
Nice.
Taking a book out of the Team Hell No there. So, but anyways, welcome wrestling fans. Again, been a while. Sorry it's been so long since we last did an episode, but we're to a point now. We're finally back. Hopefully William will be back here probably in a couple of weeks. I'm sure he's going to be out next week due to some other issues going on. But Brian, how have you been?
Been good. Watching a lot of the product. We'll get into it a little bit today. I think we got a little bit of, I'm excited for today's show. We got a lot of, just little random things going on in the world of wrestling. And we definitely got a little state of the IWC and the product overall. And I think you guys will want to stay to the end for that.
Indeed. But it's been kind of a slow course for the pro wrestling world. After WrestleMania, usually kind of simmers down a bit, but then we start working our way to the build to the big PLEs, like, the King and Queen of the Ring, which is going to be on Night of Champions. We also got AEW's All in Texas coming up here in July. So, there's some good things going, but as you mentioned, we do need to get to kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to the state of the IWC segment, and we'll get a little more into that detail. But Brian, should we just go ahead and get right to it?
Let's get in.
So here's kind of a disappointment. WrestleMania, Jey Uso finally gets that big opportunity. He finally wins the World Heavyweight Championship from Gunther. Unfortunately, unlike his other bloodline relative, this is probably the shortest bloodline member title reign. I believe it was only 54 days, 51 days, I can't remember, of being the World Heavyweight Champion. And it's a little frustrating because anyone who listened to Rikishi's podcast the other day, he wants almost everybody's head that was involved in the creative and writing team for that. In some ways, I kind of agree with him, but I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that, Brian. But why don't we get your reaction on
that?
How horrible this reign was.
Yeah, I did hear, some comments from Rikishi on it. The one that stuck out to me the most was would you do this to Randy Orton? Would you do this to another main household name? And then he referenced how over Jey Uso is and his entrance in Mania and how many people were in attendance. So for those listening, that was the gist of kind of what Rikishi was saying. I always take a little of what he's saying and I kind of go about 60, 70% into it. And then that other 30, 40% is usually the emotion, right? So he goes through the emotions and the emotion follows, right? So I look at it and I think that I don't think it's unwarranted, but I do think obviously he's very invested in his son's success, right? And he's going to say those things and have those feelings. Me personally, I look at it, I was a person that felt that it was way too soon to win a Rumble. And I felt like it was going to end up being a throwaway Rumble win. And here's a world title. Not that he has not earned with his time working in the WWE, right? But just because you've earned time in the WWE doesn't mean you necessarily get a world championship guaranteed, right? So Ron Killens has ran through that recently, right? He's been there a very long time. I joke right now, but Michael Cole's been there, one of the longest reigning employees there. He's not a world champion, right? But ultimately, there is a lot of people that are mid-card. They don't get that reward. I'll let you guys, debate that if, it was warranted. But I know I didn't care for the match at Mania, and it wasn't more or less on the work. It was more on the ending and how Gunther tapped out so quick, right? Because I thought it weakened this, character of his that he's built up. And I look at it and I say, they did it because he does fit well in marketing. Jey Uso does well in marketing. He does very good, we mentioned before, on the kid demographic, right? The child demographic, and him even grabbing a kid out of the audience and doing the yeet in the entrance, right? It's very, very Bret Hartish, putting the glasses on a lucky young kid, right? So I do think his merchandise sells, and it sells to a younger audience. And I see the WWE's reasoning behind that and the fact that he's a loyal employee. But at the end of the day, I never felt the struggle of Jey Uso. I never felt his pain in struggling and trying to overcome Gunther. I've always just felt that Gunther was just better. And Gunther dominated him so hard. I never felt the struggle. And that goes into storytelling that I know we'll get into later. But, they didn't tell the story. They just sold the merchandise, sold the character very quick, and then pushed it on. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at. And Gunther winning the title, I was happy to see the title get back on him because I feel he is a very credible, dominant champion. And that was because of all the storytelling and work they did with the Intercontinental Championship. Jey Uso's never had those kind of moments to build him into a main event. So I'll leave it there. I know that's a lot, but I wanted to get the overall thoughts. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to kind of probably rile you up anymore, even though you kind of wanted to put it in there. But there's something you said that I want to touch back on, and that was where Jey Uso, maybe it was too early for him to win the Royal Rumble, especially after he had an opportunity to defeat Gunther for that World Heavyweight Championship. He didn't do it. And what doesn't really make sense is, okay, if that was the case, why didn't you just have him defeat Gunther the first match, then have Gunther win the Royal Rumble just to win it back at WrestleMania? That's the route I probably would have went with if that was going to go the direction it has gone now. But yeah, it's very frustrating when you give someone such a short title reign, and it just, to me, it kind of takes away the prestige of the championship, especially one where they started a new lineage for this particular championship, because as they mentioned before, it wasn't going to carry the lineage from the previous, whether it was the Universal Championship or the actual WWE World Heavyweight Championship. It's a whole new lineage. And when you do something like give a title reign of only 50 so on days, one, that already made Jey Uso the shortest reigning World Heavyweight Champion. But two, when you have championship reigns go that short, you don't do it any justice. But yeah, to me, if that was going to be the case, I wouldn't have had Jey Uso win the Royal Rumble. I would have had somebody like John Cena just win it and move on to the Elimination Chamber and have something else go for that to figure out who Gunther's championship or challenger was going to be. Because let's face it, we already knew John Cena was going to come in and win the Undisputed Championship from Cody. That was just a given right away. I just felt it was too early to have Jey Uso do that rematch with Gunther when it could have been done later on, like at a King of the Ring, like, for example, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. It just, I don't know. I kind of feel like they did Jey Uso a little dirty, his fan base a little dirty. I think Rikishi was justified in what he's said on his podcast. I don't know. And as we'll discuss this a little later too in the state of the IWC segment, it just goes down to, yeah, maybe there is a problem with the writing and creative in WWE right now. And we'll get to that. But here's something that's, I don't know if it's been confirmed. We know it's been heavily rumored. It's been talked about by many of the dirt sheet writers and the insiders. But one of the reasons suggested why Jey Uso's reign was short was they were going to put the championship back on Gunther to defend the championship against Goldberg. And this match is rumored, I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, to be at a Saturday night's main event. If this does happen, here's my big question. You take the championship off Jey Uso to give it to Gunther to defend against Goldberg in a Saturday night's main event match. Does Gunther and Goldberg really need a championship on the line for a good match?
Yeah, I would say no. I will say the only storytelling that is to be had with the title on the line, and you could say, well, that title looks like the one Goldberg had, right? It's the big gold, right? He could say, I want my title back. It's mine. You know, you could kind of go that route, and I want to be the superhero to my son. He's already planted that. They did plant the seeds to this feud a long time ago, so I do like that. But I really think I'm reaching to say, yes, it needs that championship moment, right? And again, I kind of look at the Jey Uso stuff. If the storytelling was a little bit stronger with Uso's struggle, yeah, there would have been no reason to even pull that title off of him for this matchup. So an example I look at is, you know, even if you wanted him to win the Rumble, I would have had him win it against all final contestants being all bloodline or former bloodline members, right? So that way it reminds us, oh yeah, that's right. He struggled with all these guys and he's got to beat the ones he likes, right? So, but we didn't get that. So therefore I think WWE just quickly hot potatoed it. Some people think it might be because of Seth Rollins. I think Seth Rollins is going after the bigger prize with the John Cena title. It doesn't mean John Cena, but that title eventually, we have a year. I don't think this matchup needs a championship, but I get that if you want Gunther to defend against Goldberg, that's another notch in his career belt, and it's a pretty big one, and it just adds to his legacy. So I'm not hating that. You could literally say the master of the best Intercontinental Championship streak is now the defeater of the greatest streak. So you could play that angle up. What are your thoughts on this one?
You know, I'm with you. I don't think it necessarily needs a championship, but I think who could be the most dominant. And unfortunately, these two dominate in different fashions, though. Bill Goldberg was known for very short matches, quick squash match. It was just a couple wrestling moves, spear, jackhammer, done. Gunther's known to just toy his opponents like a cat with a mouse, you know. It's a bat here, a bat there, chop the shit out of them, you know, and then puts them to sleep. Gunther is known to just dominate his opponents by beating them up in the ring. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this match unfolds when the bell starts. Is it going to be similar to like what happened with Brock Lesnar at Survivor Series with Goldberg, or are we going to get something that's going to actually last more than 5 minutes? And it's really frustrating to kind of see how this all has unfolded now for it to be a championship match. And I get what you're saying. But Goldberg wants to get that championship back, the one that resembled his time in WCW. However, what's Goldberg now? Almost nearly 60, probably.
I would have to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, if Gunther wins, I believe he will now become one of the oldest world champions in WWE history. And I don't see that happening. I mean, Gunther is the ring general. He's dominant in that ring. He pretty much schools anybody in that ring that steps up to him, whether he wins or loses. Very, very slim chance he's losing. But also, Goldberg wasn't known for losing much either until like the tail end of his WCW days. For me, I don't see, if they were going to make this a championship match to begin with, they should have never had Jey Uso win the Royal Rumble and defeat Gunther at WrestleMania. They should have had someone else challenge Gunther, win in the Rumble or Elimination Chamber, and have Gunther retain at WrestleMania to keep this going. Again, I would have put Jey in the King of the Ring tournament, and there's a heavy rumor he may be that surprise person tomorrow night, which wouldn't make sense, but I wouldn't put it past WWE storyline to be doing that. But yeah, I don't know. I think this should be Goldberg's retirement match coming up against Gunther. I would hope. I made a really strong comment saying I hope Gunther just, stiff chops Goldberg into retirement. And it wasn't mean to hate on Goldberg, but in some ways I'm still a little bitter with him ending Bret Hart's career. But
I personally would like to see him beat him with a figure 4 submission. I mean, and not, like I feel like it's an old school wrestling move. And I feel like that would be a very clear, concise, I defeated Bill Goldberg.
Right. Well, and if that's the case, that would be the one guy who would make Goldberg tap, because I don't think Goldberg's ever submitted in a match ever
Not to my knowledge.
in all of his professional wrestling career. So that could be another history-making moment there if that does happen, or put Goldberg to sleep with the sleeper. So there could be many outcomes with that. I just don't think putting the strap on Goldberg would be a great idea.
No.
But I also didn't think this needed to be a championship match to have a great match between the two either.
Yeah.
So did you want to go any further on this before we move on to our next one?
No, I'm good on that. Let's go ahead and move.
All right. So back in the day, I'm going to say it was like 93, 94. I can't remember. Might even been, no, it was either 93 or 94. WWF then, WWE now, had pretty much its own pay-per-view for the King of the Ring tournament. And the thing that was special about this tournament was the entire tournament was done this whole pay-per-view. It started with the quarterfinals, then the semifinals, and then the finals. I kind of would like to see that same format come back into its own standalone PLE. Have the King and Queen of the Ring tournament happen just in one PLE. You may need to eliminate the quarterfinal matches, have those on the regular programming, but I would do the semifinals and the finals on the PLE. But the biggest thing I really don't like is how they qualify. I'm not digging the 4-way matches to qualify. That's my only gripe. But what do you think of having the King and Queen of the Ring be its own standalone PLE?
Sure. Yeah. I've advocated for this for a long time. I do believe it should be in a own pay-per-view or PLE, right? In June, every year, first week of June. And the winner of that tournament gets a title shot at SummerSlam. And it should be the Royal Rumble is to WrestleMania as King of the Ring is to SummerSlam. And I always felt like that should always be on there. With that being said, I do like the old format too. When the whole concept is you're going to enter King of the Ring on Sunday night. And you got to beat one man, then another, and then another to become King of the Ring. Right. So the idea is, wow, you got to go through this battle and you got to really, and they told stories about how guys got tired throughout the King of the Ring, how they were exhausted because I just wrestled 2 matches. Well, this guy over here got a bye because of a double disqualification. And so he got an easy shoot to the finals, right? And that created so much story told within. And think about how many great moments we got when it was a standalone PLE or pay-per-view, right? We got so many. We got Austin 316, We've got, so many great characters being built. And then when you add in a SummerSlam championship matchup, the only King of the Ring that really did that back in the day was the one that Brock Lesnar won, where they officially said, hey, he gets a title shot. And that jump-started Lesnar's career. So, yes, it should be. Now, I do like the qualifying matches, and I would give the caveat that they do need to have qualifying matches on SmackDown and Raw leading up to the night of the King of the Ring, right? Because I think that makes TV interesting and keeps people engaged. I'm okay with the multi-man matches. I like the idea that the general managers, because they can decide on the respective brands how they want their competitors to fight and prove themselves to be worthy to try to win the King of the Ring for their brand. So I think there's a lot of general manager fun that can be tied in there. Might have one GM that says, I'm going to make my guys fight 3 other guys. That way my guy's the toughest guy and he's going to end up winning King of the Ring, right? And vice versa. The other one could say, no, I know this guy's the toughest. He doesn't even need to prove it to me. And he could go with singles matches, right? So I think there's stories to be told there, which I like anytime I can watch Raw and SmackDown with purpose. But I do think King of the Ring and Queen of the Ring should be its own PLE.
Yeah, much to your point, the thing I loved about that is it shows their endurance for the entire PLE, start to finish. And, it just shows how versatile a talent can be when they have to do the quarterfinal, the semifinal, and then the final. That, to me, that shows the true prestige and validity of becoming king or queen of the ring. The only other thing I would do different, I wouldn't do mixed brands in the same bracket. I would just keep the one side of the bracket SmackDown, the other side of the bracket Raw.
Meet up in the final.
Yep. And then at the final, it's going to be SmackDown versus Raw regardless.
Yep. Love it.
To me, that would make a little more sense to keep it organized. And because at this point, you could all have it could be a SmackDown versus SmackDown in the final or a Raw versus Raw. I really think the concept they should stick with, and I'm sure they're doing it anyways, because how creative does it. I just think it would make more sense to have the opposing brands go at each other rather than have the possibility of the same brand facing each other.
100% agree with you. Definitely. And I want to comment too on that stamina thing that you mentioned, right? The Royal Rumble is a stamina pay-per-view or PLE, right? It is a stamina match. And then you have to earn that sometimes from number 1 or 2, right? And then sometimes not as much, but so I like the Raw versus SmackDown thing. I think that just adds another little baked layer in there, right? We're building like a wrestling lasagna, and it adds another layer into this lasagna, right? And so I see that, and then I just thought in my head as a storyline, if I was a general manager and I was very sure of my talent, I'd be like, you guys don't even have to wrestle for it. Tell me right now and just cut a promo on why I should pick you. And that could be its own thing. And they'll be like, this guy didn't even make him wrestle, So there could be so much that is done with it that they're not capitalizing on.
Right. All right. Before we go into our next segment, speaking of promos, we're going to do a little promo of our own, do some plugging here for our teammate, Carlos, who does some X-Space conversations, usually on Mondays after Raw and Wednesdays after AEW Dynamite. Sometimes he'll have to adjust his schedule due to work, but be sure to follow him on the X app at C2LS77, or the one he's mostly using for the time being at Conquer the No. He'll definitely list some spaces there in our community. Be sure to go check out our community there at the Fans of Pro Wrestling. You can also follow the account there at FOPW Network. Be sure to get in there, join, post some things wrestling related, get some polls in there, challenge other wrestling fans to some engaging conversations. Also follow my good friend Brian here, my tag team partner on the X app at the Brian Atkins. But most importantly, go subscribe and like his YouTube channel at Tap Out Talk. He does some really great presentation pieces, not just on wrestling. Every once in a while, he'll do some UFC. And every other once in a while, shenanigans, maybe his booty call NXT that he calls it. But But we also have a group chat on the X for the fans of pro wrestling. Just get with me, Carlos, or Brian on the X app. Just ask us how you can join. Pretty easy. Just no tribalistic behavior. Respect everybody else. And most of the time, you'll get right in there. Also, follow us on the X app. Follow me at WFI Pod or FOPW Network. And Brian,
it's at the Brian Adkins. And I wanted to mention Carlos's third X channel, which is Carlos Frost Foley. So he's got the 3 faces. Now I'm making that up. Don't follow that account. It might be bad. But so yeah, definitely everything that John mentioned, great group. And especially in those spaces, you guys can tag in and ask questions.
Yeah. And Carlos is also part of the group, the Wrestle Collective. They have some really great spaces that usually go on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And as their network is growing, they've also acquired Miami the Great, the Final Boss Lady, Jay Herbert, Advocate. There's so many different great wrestling accounts a part of that group. Be sure to get on the X app, check them out. They're also on the Discord, which they will be heavily moving toward here the next few weeks. So go check out their stuff. A lot of great content. Same with the DWE group. Miami the Great, Final Boss Baby, and a couple others. Check out our webpage, thefansofprowrestling.com. I need to work on some updates, but I will get that done. So please be patient. I know I'm a little behind on that since WrestleMania. And also follow my YouTube channel at Wrestling Fans Incite. And most of all, I've now got on TikTok. I'm going to be doing some more stuff here. You'll probably see this episode on here as well. But yeah, go follow me there at WFI Pod, and hopefully I will have some great content going, possibly some more shorts. But Brian, without any further ado, let's get into some AEW stuff here.
Let's do it. And for those of you that hit the skip button for 30 seconds on YouTube, welcome back.
So a couple of great, interesting storylines. As you know, we just recently had the Owen Hart Foundation tournament for the men's and the women's, similar to the King of the Ring and Queen of the Ring of WWE. This is AEW's version. And as we all know, the winners of that tournament gets a title shot at the All In pay-per-view. For those who've been hiding under a rock, if you haven't been paying attention, Mercedes Moné is the one that won that tournament. She ended up defeating Jamie Hayter for that prestigious cup and world title opportunity. She'll be taking on Timeless Toni Storm for the AEW Women's World Championship. And I forgot to put in women's, sorry folks, at the AEW All In pay-per-view. And if you've been watching AEW's programming, things have been heating up with their face-offs. Brian, what's your thoughts on Mercedes Moné challenging Timeless Toni Storm here shortly?
Yeah, so this is the best female matchup that they can offer. And I do think it's the right call. I am apprehensive, and here's why. The last major match that I wanted to see with Mercedes Moné was Britt Baker. And we got that match, and it was just a match. It wasn't even a feud, right? It didn't carry on to multiple matches. It didn't really hit on all the pistons that I wanted to fire, right? So I feel like I welcome the match. I welcome the opportunity with some low expectations, even though I want high expectations. And I'm not worried about Toni Storm's effort in the match, right? And I know Mercedes Moné, I almost am like, can I get Sasha Banks in this match instead of Mercedes Moné? You know, like, can I get NXT Sasha Banks versus Bayley TakeOver 2? I want that fire under her, and I want her and Toni Storm to give us the most amazing match that both of these girls are so capable of doing, right? If she's motivated and if they both want to do something awesome with this, they can turn this into a really good feud. They both have the potential. They both have the talent, but I hope this is not just another bump in the championship road of AEW.
And much to what you said, the one thing I want to sit here and I will say this to challenge Mercedes. get rid of the showboat. Show us you want that AEW Women's World Championship. I have no doubt, like Brian said, that Tony will bring her game. And in fairness to Mercedes, I don't think Britt Baker was in ring shape when they had their match for the TBS Championship. And I'm not going to totally dog on Britt because she was out for a while. I mean, she came back from a really nasty injury, and I'm not going to make excuses for anyone. It was like you said, Brian, it was just a match. But this is for AEW's top prize in the women's division. And I felt Tony Storm, Mariah May have elevated that championship to a new height. And this is where Monet needs to really step up and take this serious. I don't want to see your dancing. I don't want to see your showboating. Get out there, be aggressive, show everyone why you have earned to hold the AEW Women's World Championship if you do win this match.
If this match doesn't do well, this title will fail.
And I'm like with you. It will scare me if that happens. I know there's disagreement with me and one other where, you know, people are saying that Mercedes has been the greatest AEW TBS championship holder. And I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to keep disagreeing. Just because Mercedes has all of these championships doesn't mean she's the greatest. I'm sorry. It isn't just the wrestling or winning matches. You need to demonstrate and perform. And to me, Jade Cargill will still hold the greatest TBS champion. I don't care what anyone says. You can't change my opinion. And, you know, my opinion isn't the golden rule or anything. Again, that's just my opinion, but I feel she still needs to elevate that TBS championship. But if they're going to do that by transitioning her to the AEW Women's Championship, get aggressive. Don't showboat. Don't give me this cartoonish shit. Show us you want that championship with fire. Bring your A game. Be aggressive. Do whatever it takes. Just be serious with this. Did you have any more, Brian?
No, and I'm glad you hit on the Jade Cargill synonymous with that TBS championship. If that was a world women's championship, right, people would have been bashing it very heavily, right? But since it was a second title, Jade was the inaugural champ. She built that up with a Goldberg-like streak. And while she was new and still learning, but what really kills me is, you know, we all seen Mercedes walk into AEW with a mega level world championship female potential. And I feel like sometimes we got, like, let's say a concert where the opening act has outperformed the main act. And I feel like whoever you want to put in that opening act, put Timeless Tony Storm and Mariah May, right? In this matchup, again, my final thoughts is it's going to make or break this championship because there's not a lot of talent in AEW women's division, right? You had Mariah May, who was built up very nicely, but where's she at now, right? So they're hurting and they need a champion to rise up and they need somebody to do what they're paid to do and be a first and world-class champion that sets the tone for the rest of the division. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. Now here's the real question that's on everyone's minds, Brian. And this story has built up really well. I know it's been a very mixed feeling in the IWC as well as the experts, the longtime legends in the business. Not too many people are hip with the Death Riders. I'm one that actually is. I've actually loved the direction AEW's taken it. And again, sometimes in wrestling, I don't necessarily need to understand the entire story because sometimes I think I love surprise elements. I think the Death Riders have brought a much different feel to the AEW main event scene or whatever pay-per-view they appear in. But especially with Jon Moxley in the AEW World Championship, I felt Moxley has been that guy to carry the company and well deserving to carry that AEW Championship. A lot of people are getting tired of seeing it. But here's the question, and I've loved the way they've built this up recently. Hangman Adam Page is the one who has won the men's side of the Owen Hart Foundation final or tournament. Is Hangman Adam Page the man to dethrone Jon Moxley for the AEW Championship? And if you don't mind, I'll kind of start off. I think with everything Hangman's been through in the last year, the storyline with Swerve burning his house down and showing he's taking no shit. Some of the other matches he's gone through that probably doesn't stand out quite as much. He's kind of went on his own solo cowboy act. I think as serious as Hangman Page has made himself in the last year, I think he should be the guy to dethrone Jon Moxley for the AEW World Championship. I know many people feel Darby Allin should be the guy doing it, but he's been out of sight, out of mind for so long. I don't know why he should be the guy to do it right now. For me, why not make it Hangman Adam Page? Your thoughts?
Okay, so initially, I wouldn't have put him in that spot. Not that it doesn't make any sense. I would have not put him in that spot because I wouldn't have thought of him, right? My brain was, MJF or Swerve Strickland's going to end the title, right? And end the Jon Moxley reign. And just because they are both very young in their careers, they both MJF he's a figurehead in AEW, right? He's our scumbag. He chose us over WWE, right? Like there's so much. He to me is one of the best talents they have on that roster, and it makes just sense, right? Swerve Strickland is one of the best young champions now. He has been a world champion on that roster that hits a different demographic, and there are two different fight styles with those two guys that AEW should build around, right? So my brain was in the mode of those two doing it. Here comes Adam Page. AEW original? Yep. AEW former champion? Yep. He's been there a while and he's done pretty consistent work with multiple guys like Swerve Strickland and beyond, right? One of my favorite AEW moments that I just forget about is Adam Hangman Page related when he dethroned Kenny the Collector, right? And they had a great storytelling in there with the Young Bucks and who are they going to kind of side with. And then I love the moment in the match when he was going to go for his finisher, right? And he looked at the Young Bucks like, are you going to interfere? And they just gave the nod like, go ahead. And boom. And then he won his championship, right? And I was wowed by it. And I was like, wow, that was good storytelling because you felt the friend's struggle and you felt he needs to be taken down a notch. Kind of it was a good storytelling by AEW, and it was one of my favorite moments. And Hangman Page, I loved the winning of the title. I didn't care necessarily for after that. And he kind of just fizzled down a little. But you know what? He may have learned a lot. And it's been a while since he's been champion. And I feel like he would have learned in the last, 3 years or so, what it's like to be a face of a company, what it's like to be kind of the guy. He's had a lot of time to absorb a lot of information from a lot of people that have walked through there. And maybe it is his time. And if that's the case, I'm okay with that. I just did not think of him initially, but that's okay because, we're not going to think of everything, right? And at the end of the day, I think Tony Khan is looking for people he trusts, right? There's been people that he trusted that did him incorrectly or vice versa in the past. And so if you notice, he went right to Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley is his safe person to go to. He's a 3-time champion now? Right? 4-time champion. See, so he obviously knows you're dependable. I'm going with you. He's a year one guy. He was there in that first year. Chris Jericho's another one, but he's at the tail end, right? But he knows he can trust him.
No, you're going to flare up the IWC now.
he knows he can trust Chris. Chris and him had a great relationship. I'm not saying put the title on Chris. We know where he's at, but
Yeah.
he's safe. And Tony needs those safe people. And Adam Hangman Page is one of those safe people that he can trust. And I think Kenny Omega is the other one, right? But ultimately, he's still building relationships with Swerve and with everybody else. So I get it. And I'm like, yeah, makes sense. And I'm not hating. And it does make Adam Hangman Page more relevant because he has kind of fizzled out a little. And it just puts him right back in there and reminds us that he is a world champion. So that's my overall answer.
Well, and here's something I'm a little surprised you didn't bring up. I kind of feel like this is a rebound to gain back the downfall of the CM Punk curse when his title reign ended.
Yeah.
For me, I don't think he should have lost the championship to CM Punk. And to be honest, this is going to piss off a lot of CM Punk fans. There was no reason for CM Punk to win a championship that early either in a company he was brand new to. That was ridiculous. And when
coming off a failed UFC run.
yeah. That's for another conversation. But there's a lot that Hangman Adam Page has to gain from this. And I think when he was done wrong with the whole CM Punk angle, especially with the way CM Punk acted afterwards, I think this is a good way to rebound Hangman's career and his legacy to hold a world championship once again and be the guy for the company. And to have him go up against John Moxley for this, I don't think it could be any better opponent for Hangman Adam Page than the guy who has been the most dominant character ever in AEW history.
Let me ask you a question. How would you follow up the booking roughly if Hangman wins? And so we don't do kind of what we did last time with it kind of fizzling. Who do you book him to fight in the next year? And you could, one or a couple people, or like kind of what popped in your head when I asked that.
And I will tell you right off the bat, Swerve Strickland will be the first one I think I would book him against just because of their storyline, their history. But there's quite a few there that you can put him up against, like Samoa Joe. You can also put him up against the likes of Kyle Fletcher, Will Ospreay. There's a lot of new guys coming up into the company that you can put them up against. Mm-hmm. You just need to make the story make sense. And we'll talk about that in our next segment because I know you have a lot to get off your chest, but why don't we actually just go ahead and get right into it, Brian?
Sure.
Brian and I kind of feel it's time to make a state of the IWC, not necessarily toward the fans in the community, but with the promotions, the two biggest promotions we have here in the Northern America, in the United States here. But Brian, I'm going to let you take the floor.
All right. So yeah, it's a lot of things the fans are talking about, right, in the IWC. So, and they're very good points. They're very good topics being brought up. I will lead in and I will say that, we're going to be talking primarily about WWE and AEW. Both companies, in my opinion, are doing something wrong, but they're two different wrong things, right? Which is very interesting, right? Because we'll start on the WWE side. WWE, I feel there is a very lack of a lot of a storytelling being told in the ring, on the air. And I did give one good example. There are a few little good examples in there, right? So it's not like it's completely horrible. But I mentioned in our little pre-show talk, I said, I have watched wrestling for a very long time. I have been a fan for a very long time through some very rough times in pro wrestling. And I never, I still found things that I enjoyed, right? In the last month, I would say, like I just got to the point where I started getting very bored. right? And I just said, okay, I'm getting bored with the product. I'm getting very tired of shameless promotions and commercial. And I feel like I need a pop-up blocker for watching WWE programming, right? And it's like, it's almost like they hit you in the face with it with your phone, and it's like, look at this, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm like, wow, I can't even get into the matches or into the story. And I'm starting to get sucked in. They're like, hey, we got the Slim Jim table coming out. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Why are you now talking about, beef jerky and Slim Jims? Like, and it throws me so off of something I've enjoyed for so long. And I've learned over the years how to enjoy, even if it's not the best product, I've learned how to enjoy it. But you keep pop-up adding everything, right? And I understand business. I understand money. It makes sense. I get it, right? But we do live in an age and era where, man, how much money is enough, right? And if you make a lot of money, which they do, can we just make that money again? Or do we have to consistently more, right? Because eventually the food bowl is going to be empty. And I feel like the WWE potentially is getting in the cargo business. And what I mean by that is when you're in the cargo business, you forget, well, to put more stuff on the plane, put more stuff. And now you're just transporting stuff and you don't have passengers, right? Passengers would be fans in this analogy. So what happens when you don't have fans? What happens when you annoy them and they slowly back out or they slowly find ways to fast forward through your storytelling? That the talent, and I don't think this is the talent's fault. The talent is still the talent. There's a lot of talent out there that work very hard their entire careers on their craft, right? Just for a chance to get to the main roster. And then they see themselves being in wrestling in between ads that are popping up, right? On the apron, and then the latest thing I heard is we are now getting ads on uniforms, on outfits that the wrestlers are going to be. WWE is intending on putting ads on attire. Okay. And they did this at the pay-per-view or the PLE for NXT versus AAA. They conditioned us as fans from a psychological standpoint. I know how business psychology works because sometimes I've done it, right? But there's a business psychology to it. And they talked about Legado del Fantasma talking about the AEW patch that's going to be on their pants. And they said, we're fighting for, or not AEW, excuse me, WWE patch. And they said, we're fighting for WWE, where this is going to be on our outfits. All right. That's fine to the naked eye, but the trained eye shows me, which I've considered myself a trained eye to that stuff. I'm like, they're conditioning us to advertising on outfits. Well, that was just a little patch this big. Well, then it becomes a little bigger, and then it becomes Slim Jim. And then it becomes, so they know that it's a big hill to overcome and they don't want fan blowback. So they have to psychologically condition us to slowly add patches, to a point of NASCAR driving in UFC, right? And the difference is the drivers or even the UFC fighters, that they get that money directly. They actually go and raise, UFC fighters used to raise their own finance rolls to train, to build, right? So it made more sense. But, and I don't want my WWE to be like that. So that's on the WWE side. The AEW side of this, the business, not all of the business, but a big portion of the business that I talked about, the fans' hearts, is wide open for the taking right now. As WWE pushes the advertising, money, less content, less story, more advertising. AEW, while they have a little advertising, but they don't go overboard with it. And if they wanted, they could steal some wrestling fans, right? They could steal because they could take and they could say, let's do what they used to do. We're never going to be as big as them in the modern next 10 years, right? We're not going to have this worldwide monopoly where we're buying these companies and they're becoming our minor leagues. And, even though they do a little bit with Ring of Honor, I feel like AEW, if they focus on really good story, and they do good with their in-ring product, right? For the most case, But if they really get in that entertainment phase without being full WWE entertainment, they could take a lot of fans. They won't take them all, right? But they could take a good amount of fans to sustain them for the next couple years or a few years and really start building those relationships with those fans. And much like the way of WCW did, right? They did it differently. They bought the talent that we fell in love with, and they grabbed them and dragged them over here. And then we became WCW fans. AEW's got to pull us over by giving us sports entertainment wrestling the way we love it. And they're not doing that right now. And so that's my side on, what they're not doing correctly in that sense. They're not going through the motions, but they are writing stories, right? But it's just, I can't think of the stories that have really grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me in and said, come here, I'm going to show you something, right? I turn it on because I enjoy wrestling. I turn it on because I like to see what goes on, right? Sometimes that fast forward button does kick in, and I watch it, I'm like, all right. And there's times where I say, you know what? I don't care about that one, and I feel like Jim Cornette, the way he on his podcast talks about fast forwarding all, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So AEW, I would love to see them get down to a story. We mentioned in our last segment with Hangman Page struggling against his friends and his friends struggling. And that was a good story moment, right? And AEW has the potential to do that. And they have done it. I love some of the MJF stories, but also there's stories that have fell through. I posted a little mashup video the other day, right? And it was over the Devil reveal. Everybody on my channel, it was like 17,000 views on it, right? And everybody was bashing, like that was the worst story in AEW history. No payoff, no. And I'm like, yeah, there was no follow through to it, right? It just was there and then it went away. And I would ask them to embrace that culture a little and say, hey, what can we do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months down the road with all levels, not just main event, but middle, lower? Does everybody have a purpose? Does everybody here working tonight have a story? I remember Chris Jericho and Kane Chris Jericho and Kane fighting over hot coffee, right? But the story had a purpose. I remember Chris Jericho, and maybe Jericho's just good at this stuff, and William Regal fighting over the fact that he peed in his tea, right? There was great moments that we said, it's not even a championship match. I don't care. I'm watching. He's going to get him, right? So I would ask AEW to really hone in on that. I know they have that potential, and man, I'm almost begging for it, right? Because I know I'm not going to get away from the pop-up ads, and it's only going to get more and more. I'm still going to watch WWE, right? I'm still going to watch AEW. I'm a fan for life. I'm probably not going anywhere, but I will say this. I have stopped going to the arena. I have stopped paying, and I won't even get into that aspect of it, guys. But, when I see the expensive seats, and I get inflation, but when I see a meet and greet with no disrespect to Bianca Belair and whatever other talent, but this one pops in my head and they're like $3,000 or, $800,000. I'm like, for that money, go meet someone else that's not, that's a legend, or go meet somebody else that's, go meet somebody that's not in the company. Go meet Chris Jericho. I guarantee you he won't charge you that much. But to me, and I know the talent probably isn't even getting that money, right? And like when I see some of that, I'm like, they're out of their minds. And what it does is there will be people that will pay it, but it's like the Super Bowl, right? Where it's only the movers and shakers of the world that are really attending these events with these high sales. And if the fans, like the Wrestling Fans Incite fans and the fans of pro wrestling, right? That's what we're called. If we don't have those kind of fans in the attendance, well, then WWE crowds are going to look a little boring, and you can distract yourself with it. And you can say, let's go overseas. They're not used to us. They'll cheer. That's only going to sustain you for so long, right? And if you don't have those real fans in there, they're not going to scream and holler and hands in the air, right? Like, and you're going to have a bunch of people that don't really know how to celebrate success at a WrestleMania. And so that's kind of where I wanted. I know that's a lot. I felt like there's a lot there I just said, but I want to get your thoughts on it. And anybody in the chat, if you guys want to lay some thoughts out there too. I feel like this is something that just a conversation that needs to be had in an organized fashion. So go ahead, John.
And before I go off, I'm going to say, fuck it, we're going to go past the hour mark anyway. I will give probably a little not quite as detailed as Brian. He actually went over 10 minutes on that, which I'm like, holy shit. And the guy didn't even need a drink of water. And I watched poor Miami on his YouTube on Talk It Up the other day, and that poor guy had dry mouth just in 5 minutes. But shout out to Miami the Great show on Saturday, bud. So first and foremost, yeah, be sure to go follow me and Brian. Hit us up in our DM or even get in our group chat or in our community at the Fans of Pro Wrestling Network. Let us know what you think of the show and your thoughts or even reactions to what we say. Doesn't matter if it's negative, positive, just let us know. One of the key things I talked to you about before we started recording, Brian, was I think some of the biggest problems we've had in wrestling over the years. It seems like there almost needs to be a PLE or pay-per-view every month. When you do that, you're trying to rush to find a reason why to have this and that on every pay-per-view or PLE. And I think that's one of AEW's biggest struggles with the AEW side you mentioned. I think the biggest problem is they always feel like they need to load a 4-hour pay-per-view match with, anywhere from 12 to 14 matches. One of the key things I've always will say is it takes time to tell a story. You don't need to rush a story to tell it. And I think that's why I get frustrated with every month PLEs, sometimes twice a month PLEs in a month, which is ridiculous. I think in some ways they need to cut back. You don't necessarily maybe need to go only 4 pay-per-views or 4 PLEs a year, but I swear if you do it like every other month or every quarter, do what makes sense, but get those storylines to tell something, to make it interesting. I know Stampede kind of got frustrated when I mentioned the Hulk Hogan and Earthquake storyline, but yeah, that thing went almost a year and a half. Was it the best storyline? No, but they were able to tell their story in a year and a half. You don't see that very often. Look what they did with Roman Reigns in WWE for 4 years as the undisputed WWE Universal Champion, whatever. How often are you going to see that ever again? They took their time to not make a champion work so much, but also tell the story. And that's what made Cody's win over him on WrestleMania 40 so special, with a little bit of overbooking in the match, of course. But, the biggest thing is I think part of the problem is sometimes with competition, they're too busy focusing on their competitor and how to disrupt their competitor rather than focus on themselves. And that's something I will say I think AEW has cut back a bit on in the last year. Because, when they first came into play, it was full force dog on WWE on every little aspect. But you notice they've toned it down a little bit. Now you're seeing WWE try to schedule PLEs or, special events around AEW's pay-per-view schedule or their TV schedule. And to your point on the WWE side, where they're really doing terrible with creating interest or having a good storyline, I think their focus is too much is to counter AEW's programming, and they're not taking the time to develop storylines that they should be working on. I think if they just focus on themselves, much like, what Eric Bischoff has said, where WCW went wrong in the Monday Night Wars, They got too caught up on trying to go against WWE, but they lost the focus on what made them unique. This is what both companies need to do. They need to go back to making themselves unique and make it interesting for the fans to watch them. You're always going to have AEW only fans. You're going to always have the WWE only fans. And there's probably going to be very few that are fans of almost watching both programs, if not all programs, where you and I kind of fall into that category. We both like watching AEW. We both like watching WWE. I love watching almost any promotion, to be honest, because I'm always intrigued by the different culture each company has for its fan environment. But yeah, it's really frustrating to see that. I think WWE's lost its way with storytelling. I think sometimes they drag it out too much too. That's the biggest problem. I think WWE could put a little more effort into their programming to get some more wrestling and not as too detailed in the story, because sometimes if you get too detailed in it, it's going to lose interest, right? I think if they focused on some better ingredients to put into the recipe, they would be right there. I think if AEW kind of worked on not needing to have, so many matches in a 4-hour period, 3-hour period, they could do a better job telling some long-term storytelling as well. Get things be a little more interesting. I think the problem is the wrestling business has evolved. Everything's got to be snap, snap, snap right away. We don't need that. Just take your time. You don't need to have everybody on the card all at once. Let stories develop. Let's see how the fans can take in the story, because you get guys like me who sometimes has a hard time following some of the stories. Busy life, I got things to do, but when I tune in, I want to make sure I remember what the history is between competitors in the ring. And much to your point, I don't feel like they've done a very good job of that on both ends. Did you want to continue on a little more? Sorry.
No,
I'm kind of rambling now.
No, you're good. I'm absorbing a lot of the things you said, because it's a good conversation. And, kind of to your point, honing in, if each company would kind of focus on themselves a little, right? I mean, WWE has amazing presentation. Amazing. You got,
and they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Neither company's going anywhere.
They know what they're doing. They have a presentation. AEW has a different side of that, right? But, when you look at it, I'll give you a great example. Ron Killens, R-Truth, right? The WWE corporation, right, severely missed on a huge demographic of an audience that cared about that, right? And they can try to backpedal and say, oh, that was part of the story. No, okay. But there's a great example, right? And I love the fact that they pivoted a little and made us think we were being worked in that. And I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine, because that means you actually listened, right? And so when I see that, that's one example. But here's another example, right? When it comes to storytelling, I use the Wyatts as an example, right? You have a character group that hits then a different target audience that has been known to enjoy wrestling. Think Supernatural Undertaker and Kane, and there is a market for a audience like that. But we're more worried about selling Mercy the Buzzard's hand puppet than we are writing some amazing content that I know that those talents are capable of. I love that they have all those guys in that group, because it gives them something to do, but there's no story and sustenance for them to do. So we throw them on SmackDown. And, oh yeah, I forgot about them. Hey, you need to work tonight. Just go out there and do something, right? And I've lost a little bit of, I used to get so excited about the Wyatt family stuff. All the vignettes are amazing. I love it. It's old school. I used to post it on my own channel, and just talk about, but now I'm just like, oh, they debuted. Okay, cool. And when I'm saying that, it tells me that they're losing me as a fan into a character I want to be invested in. Right. And, I got to ask you, I'll throw the questions back to you here, but what characters are on TV now? And this could be in either promotion. Are you going to be so invested in that you're going to want to talk about it on this show in 10 years? Because we have a lot from the past that we can talk about and reflect on, right? We're really good at that from the 80s, 90s, modern era. But who are the characters now that we're going to be 10 years from now doing a show and saying, man, do you remember this awesome, and still be invested in those characters? Do you have any that come to mind that they're building?
I think, to be honest, and this will probably shock a lot of people, I think Timeless Tony Storm would be one.
Okay.
She's still got a lot to go. I mean, she's still very young. You got Hangman Adam Page, who I think AEW has done a wonderful job of being solid, like you mentioned earlier. AEW original, and he's a company man, and he's going to keep going strong. For the WWE side of things, I can't imagine how we can never have a conversation about John Cena.
True.
Probably Seth Rollins. Definitely Roman Reigns. Gunther, depending on how much longer he's going to go, because, I mean, that's a standout right there. As far as the women, I think, we got Charlotte Flair, Rhea Ripley, Bayley. Those are very few there that I bet we could talk about in the next 10 years or so.
An interesting point that you mentioned there, because a lot of the guys you mentioned on the WWE side, they were made during the Vince McMahon era, right? In that era. And I noticed you didn't bring up a Braun Breaker or, the guys that are still trying to be built in the modern corporate era. This is the corporate era. We are in the corporate era of WWE. I just came up with that, but there's the Attitude Era, the new generation, then there's the corporate era. And I'm like, man, Braun Breaker, maybe.
And sorry to interrupt, but the thing with Braun Breaker is, he's going to be a force here in the future. But right now, having him in a faction with Seth Rollins, not a bad idea. It may elevate him. But if you want me to talk about Braun Breaker, he needs to be on his own. I mean, he needs to show me why he's that standout star. But, I mean, look at Randy Orton. We're still talking about after 20 years.
Yep.
He eventually started on his own, went to Evolution.
Yep.
But being in Evolution made him a bigger star once he left. And he's now the 14-time world champion, right up there with Triple H.
Yep.
I believe he's tied with Triple H. But yeah, I think Braun Breaker, there's possibilities we'll be talking about him 10 years from now. But right now, he just doesn't come to mind because I think we need to see him do things on his own or do something unique that we haven't seen. All we can do is talk about the speed in the ring, 23 miles an hour. Holy shit. And that killer spear he does probably better than anybody, even Goldberg and Roman Reigns,
And one of my, I love that, again, they are young in their career, so it's hard to predict, right? But it's I need to fall in love with these characters, right? Like if I am watching Braun Breaker and you're telling me about his spear, and we haven't seen a spear like it since Goldberg and guys that have done these moves, right? And you're like, ooh, interesting, right? But just as I'm tuning in and I say, let me check him out. And he's a Steiner? Cool, let me check him out, right? And then all of a sudden, this spear is brought to you by Dude Wipes, and they were wearing a shirt for it, and I'm like, you just took me out of the element. I'm in a movie, and then all of a sudden you're wearing and you just took me completely out of my getting into what's being told. And I'm fearful that it's going to be very tough for the talent to tell those stories if we keep getting interrupted. So I'm hoping the program style changes in that sense.
When you keep overshadowing your product with the sponsors, with the sponsorship, I mean, it just gets old real quick. Because are you there to show your product, or are you there to just show the people who support you financially? Which, I understand why you got to do it every once in a while, but when you do it every replay segment, or every time you're in between matches, it's like, holy shit, enough, man.
And you have it now on the briefcase for Money in the Bank.
Yeah.
You had it on ladders with duct tape, I think it was, and tables, right? And I'm like, okay, so not just on the apron anymore, right? And it is coming. The attires are coming, so, and they'll condition us and breadcrumb us to it. Unfortunately, some people will fall for that, right? But, and I really am like, man, these stars are going to have to go on the internet and go into their phones and try to connect with their audiences and their fans, right? Because the product on TV is not going to allow them to do that as much. And so they're going to have to find alternate ways to do that. And unfortunately, in some companies, they don't like it when you do that. And then they get mad because you went into business for yourself, right? And that's what I'm a little fearful of, is going to be, what's the penalty for that now, right? And I'm a little fearful of that. And that's why I said the door for AEW is wide open. If they want to grab some of this industry and pull it over, man, they've got every chance in the world to do it. But I just don't know if they know how to fully grab it by the throat and choke it, Right. And it's not a knock on any of these companies. Obviously, I enjoy things on their product. I do enjoy things in their shows weekly. We talked about King of the Ring and the tournaments and stuff, and I'm still enjoying that stuff. But yeah, that's kind of, for me, is my fear in the state of what the IWC is talking about, right? And, I think sometimes that gets ignored, and I think that's where shows like this, our role is to correctly inform on both ends, and also to, just kind of speak our mind in a good way. And, and it's not like we're completely going negative on it. But something need to be said on it. And I think, what CM Punk say, the voice of the voiceless, right? So I think that's our responsibility a little bit. So.
All right. Well, that was a fun little bit of dialogue we had here today. It's been a while. We felt like we needed to finally get an episode out and again. And, unfortunately, we had to do it without William. William, hope you're getting better. He's going through some health issues again. But hopefully here in a couple of weeks, we will have him back. But Brian, as we're kind of wrapping things up, let's get right into our final thoughts and shout outs here. Why don't you go ahead and start off, and I'll counter right after.
All right. So let's do some shout outs to everybody on Twitter X. I will not call it just X, Twitter X, that follows and just supports me, right? And you guys and everybody. I don't interact a lot, right? I don't interact very much, but I do tag in when I can, throw some things out there. I try to read everything, but also, just thank you guys for that community that you've built over there, because I like jumping in on random spaces, and like Carlos's, like you mentioned there, I like to just randomly pop in and get a pulse of the community. And there's sometimes when something happens, I went on to DWE's space that he had right after Jey Uso won, because I was like, oh, I got to hear what people are saying. And then they wrote me into the conversation, which I did appreciate. But I really was like, oh, I just got to hear what they're saying, because I need to sometimes get a pulse on what the community thinks, because it's not necessarily always what I think. So thank you to everybody that gives me that.
Wow. I want to give some shout outs to our fellow podcasters. Jim over at Fan the Van, he's been doing some great takes, keeping it 100% real. He's even been throwing some wrestling takes at some points in his show. but be sure to go check him out again. Jim over at Fan in the Van. You can also check out some of his partners. Garrett, he does the Steel and Teal Pod. They're usually on there every once in a while. They're not on every week, but they try to get to each other when they can. They mostly talk about football and some baseball here and there. Also, go check out Average Joe Sports. Every once in a while, Jim gets with E-Man there, and they do some live YouTube on Fridays, I believe. Be sure to go check them out. Also, check out the Two Dudes Sports News, Aaron over at Brutally Honest Sports, Brent and Dave there at the 1420 Sports Bar Podcast, Nate over at Nate's Daily Wager. Also visit Vegas Places with Coil, In a Pickle Pod. Be sure to join our fellow co-host, Carlos, every once in a while. Again, he does his spaces on the X app every Monday and Wednesday. Monday, he does the Raw Reactions with Carlos, and Wednesday Night Chaos, as well as does some of the spaces with the Wrestle Collective on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Be sure to go check out Chairshot Media Sports. Also, Big Mike over there Thursdays. I can't remember what his show is called. I think it's the Run-In Podcast.
Yep.
Be sure to check out our DWE family, Miami the Great, Final Boss Lady. And also, make sure you go check out our friend there, Austin Boyer. He does the Wrestling World over on YouTube. He does a few short videos, as well as our fellow buddy, Ted the Hillbilly Hill. He does Ted's Takes on Wrestling. Don't make mistakes. Trust Ted's Takes. Woo!
I love that tagline he has. Love it.
Yes. Well, that was a mouthful there, so sorry to ramble on, folks, but I think this is a good spot to end it for Brian and myself. I will be back again next Sunday with another recording. Brian, I'm not sure if you're going to be with us, but if not, I'll be a solo, I guess. So not a solo Sokoa, that is. But anyhow, without any further ado, any final things, Brian, before we go?
It's time to eat. It's super dynamic cooking time. See you guys.
And also, happy Father's Day to all you wonderful dads out there. Hope you're having a great day relaxing. And if you're not, hopefully you're just cooking the dinner, like the ribs or whatever on the grill. So take care, everyone. Enjoy wrestling. We'll catch you next Sunday.